I'm James, but I don't take kindly to being called Jimmy. It ticks me off. Standing before the jury, beads of sweat trickled down my face as I started my opening statement. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I had no choice but to defend myself. Was I anxious? Damn right, I was scared out of my mind. If I botched this, I was staring down 5 years in prison for assault and battery. My wife Karen sat there clutching her lover's hand, glaring at me with contempt, hoping her testimony would push me out of her life and straight into a cell. I met Karen on a wet, miserable night 16 years ago, the kind you read about in old novels. Maybe I should have taken that as a sign to stay away, but she was stunning, and I was so damn lonely. She drove a Lexus and brought it into the shop where I was just starting as a mechanic. It was my first week, and I was eager to impress my boss. Her car was a sleek silver beauty, but I couldn't keep my eyes off Karen. Her raven black hair contrasted sharply with her bright car. I tried to sneak a look at her figure, but the thick coat she wore, a necessity in the chilly San Francisco evening, didn't give me much to see. Her car kept sputtering and eventually wouldn't start at all. It was 6:00 on a Wednesday evening, and I was still scratching my head, trying to figure out what was wrong. Karen, she preferred Kate was supposed to drive from San Francisco to Sacramento that night for her cousin's wedding the next day. Then she had to rush back for an accounting exam at Berkeley. Her luggage was crammed into the trunk. I promised her I'd fix the car even if it took all night. You can imagine Kate wasn't in a chatty mood, and I respected that. The shop was empty, and I needed Kate to hold a flashlight over the engine while I slid under the car. I went back and forth, checking wiring diagrams and the fuse box. By 9:00, I discovered that a tiny crack in a fuse clip wasn't letting the circuit complete because of a nearly invisible loose wire. I fixed it, and as I looked at Kate, I felt a surge of electricity too. She cried because she had to get on the road but hated driving at night, especially in the rain. San Francisco doesn't get much rain, but when it does, it feels like the end of the world. She also had poor night vision. She started sobbing about missing her cousin's wedding. I hugged her and told her to let it all out. She melted into my arms. I was stunned by how drawn I was to her and how comfortable she seemed with me. 2 days earlier, my live-in girlfriend of 7 months and I were at a bar when a tall, muscular, well-dressed man with a Rolex watch tried to drag her away from our table to dance with him. He didn't even ask me. I told him to let her go. When he forced my hand off hers, I kicked him in the shin hard with my steel-toed boot and stomped on his foot. He limped away, and my girlfriend followed him, apologizing. She called me a loser with no future and left with him. I don't take disrespect from anyone. I don't look for fights, but I won't back down either. I didn't want to go back to my lonely apartment that night filled with memories. I'd planned to get drunk, but I had a better idea for the weekend. My girlfriend was out of the picture, so nothing was stopping me from making a move on Kate. I stroked her hair and said if she could find me a place to crash in Sacramento, I'd drive her there and back after the wedding. I knew it was impulsive, but that's just how I am. I don't think things through, I just act. I called my mom and asked her to pack me a bag with a suit and a thermos of coffee. Kate called her mom to arrange for me to stay in their guest room. We left the shop, picked up my stuff, and hit the road south. I guess my conversation wasn't that thrilling because within 10 minutes, as we climbed the hills, Kate was sound asleep, leaning on me. Being that close to a gorgeous woman helped me forget about my recent breakup. I kept my arm around her so she wouldn't slump over. About 3 hours later, as we crossed the bridge into Sacramento, I had to wake Kate to get directions to her place. She blinked awake and asked if it was her turn to drive. She saw we had driven through the night and guided me to her family's home. Kate rang the doorbell, and her mom, who was up all night grieving her brother's death, answered. Kate's mom and Kate hugged, and then her mom hugged me, thanking me for rescuing her daughter in her time of need. Her mom had an open bottle of whiskey on the table, and Kate poured out 2 more glasses. I plopped down on the plush couch. I'm not a big drinker, and 1 glass after a long day's work and a 3-hour drive knocked me out. Hours later, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the rain clouds and filtered through the stained glass windows, I woke up on the couch, wrapped in blankets. At the wedding, I held a large umbrella over Kate and her mom's heads. They both clung to my waist to stay under the umbrella. Comforting these 2 grieving women gave me a deep sense of satisfaction. I admit, I like taking care of people. My dad always said you don't judge a man by his paycheck or how tough he is, but by how well he takes care of those who matter to him. After the wedding, I met Kate's extended family, and they assumed by how we acted that we'd been together for a while. They said we made a cute couple. Kate took my arm, saying every girl dreams of finding her hero, and I was hers. By the next semester, she moved out of her dorm and into my apartment. A year later, we tied the knot. My boss at the shop was so impressed by how I fixed Kate's car and then drove her to Sacramento that he used the story in a newspaper ad to show what a caring garage he ran. I even got a raise. Kate got a job as a mortgage broker. She made good money, but didn't like the job. She confided that her boss was constantly flirting with her and had recently tried to touch her inappropriately. This confession only reinforced my trust in her. I offered two solutions: she could quit, or I could go down there and beat some respect into her boss. She quit the next day and became a real estate agent. Her brains, looks, bubbly personality, and relentless drive made her a top agent in under a year. I moved from the Honda shop to a BMW shop. Those cars are temperamental, but I had the knack for fixing them. I was now making as much as a mechanic could. I made more than most teachers and some lawyers. We were careful with our money and saved as much as we could to buy a house. When my wife took time off to have kids, we could live comfortably on my income alone. I could have started my own shop and made even more, but I didn't want the headaches that would keep me from my family. I just wanted to work on cars. I loved it so much that Kate joked I didn't have a job, just a well-paying hobby. Once a month, my boss and I would buy an old BMW, fix it up, sell it for a tidy profit, and split the money. All the extra cash went into a college fund for our kids. As much as I loved my work, I loved my kids more. I limited my overtime, so I rarely missed a family dinner. My biggest failure was trying to teach my daughters the basics of car maintenance. The thought of getting grease on their polished nails horrified them. I wasn't mad they were just girly girls. In return, they couldn't teach me how to match my shirts with my pants. We had a loving give-and-take relationship. I fixed their cars, and they picked out my clothes. My wife and I worked out in the gym we set up in our garage, and we were both in great shape for a couple in our early 40s. Though I have to admit, my hairline wasn't what it used to be. I refused to do a comb-over, though. I was content, but Kate said she was getting bored and wanted some excitement. So, for our anniversary, I took her on a second honeymoon to Cancun. Actually, it was really our first honeymoon. When we got married, all I could afford was a weekend in a dingy motel in Fresno. We stayed for a few days while the other rooms had new occupants every couple of hours. It was more like a no-tell motel. The Cancun package included a salsa dancing lesson for Kate. I'd planned for us to spend hours on the beach sipping mojitos, swimming and sunning, but things changed. After her salsa lesson at the resort, every man in the group was drooling, and Kate loved the attention. One guy reached out to touch her and I grabbed his hand before he could. I bent his fingers back until he yelped. We went back to our room where we fooled around like teenagers. For the rest of the trip, I didn't see much of Cancun unless it was from our bed. I'll always treasure that time we spent there. I thought we were both happy, but Kate's restlessness returned when we got home. She insisted she needed expensive cosmetic surgery to feel younger and better about herself. I thought she looked amazing, but her tears opened my wallet. I paid for all the surgery. She threw herself into her work, doubling her income, but at the cost of working double the hours. She rarely joined us for dinner more than once a week. I cooked, I drove our girls to school, I cheered them on at their soccer games every weekend. My absent wife had more important things to do, and our daughters often complained about it. She called them ungrateful and brushed off their feelings. They came crying to me, but I had no magic words to make them feel better. When Kate asked me to explain the importance of her work to our girls, I told her I agreed with them. She yelled that I was just an uneducated grease monkey who wouldn't understand. She stormed out of the house, returning close to midnight reeking of whiskey. One evening, while my daughters and I watched our usual reruns of CSI for the umpteenth time, Kate came home with tears of pride, clutching a glass trophy announcing she was the top agent in all 7 of her company's offices. She placed it on the mantel after moving a large family photo to make space. I couldn't help but think of all the family time she'd sacrificed for that worthless piece of glass. It was like she traded our love for that idol she now worshipped. Our marriage went downhill fast after that. Each night, she'd come home from a cocktail hour with her colleagues and rush into the shower without even kissing me. She wasn't quick enough, though, for me not to smell a man's cologne on her. Her phone was locked tight, so I couldn't find any clues there. It was clear to me and our daughters that Kate was having an affair. I warned my daughters I was going to divorce her. I had an appointment with a divorce lawyer in 3 days. My girls begged me to wait until they graduated high school before I kicked her out. One was a senior, the other a junior. They knew how badly their grades would suffer during a nasty divorce, and then they wouldn't get into a good college despite all the money I'd saved. They had enough friends who'd gone through ugly divorces to know the deal. I promised I'd wait. I'd never denied my daughters anything, so I would put up with Kate's crap for their sake, even if it meant swallowing my pride for another year. I secretly still hoped we could fix this marriage, though I knew the odds were slim. The only reason Kate came home at night was to grab clean clothes. My daughters and I did the laundry. I didn't ask her if she was cheating. I just told her if she kept this up, she'd lose her husband and daughters. I was shocked that she didn't say a word or even seem to care. I've read that this is called the fog of an affair. One of my customers, a tech guy who sold his company for billions and owned 4 Ferraris, laughed when I told him my problem and offered his help. He suggested I buy a GPS tracker for her car, put spyware on her phone, and place hidden recorders in our house, her purse, and anywhere else I could think of. Then he said I could set up a Wi-Fi server in the house, connect them all via Bluetooth, and back everything up in the cloud. I stopped him right there. I didn't understand a damn word. I know engines, but GPS trackers and spyware might as well be rocket science. I could build a spaceship easier if Scotty from Star Trek gave me some dilithium crystals. I drove by Kate's office and saw through the window that they were having a Christmas party. Most of the guests were with their spouses, but Kate hadn't mentioned it to me, much less invited me. I parked next to a new Ferrari 488 and went inside. I looked for Kate and felt my stomach drop when I saw her with some young buff guy. And that's when everything exploded. That's why I'm here today, in front of a jury, facing felony charges for assault and battery. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm James Holt. I'm a 45-year-old blue-collar mechanic who's struggling to keep working because of arthritis. I learned about my wife's company Christmas party by chance as I drove by, even though she'd kept it a secret from me. I thought I'd surprise her, but I was the one in for a surprise. My wife is 40 years old with a master's in business administration, which I paid for, and her boyfriend is 28. I'm no lawyer. My only legal education is 20 years of watching CSI. I'm representing myself because I can't afford a lawyer. In 16 years, I'd saved $525,000 in a trust fund for my daughter's college. That money was supposed to send my daughters, Emily and Olivia, to college. I asked my daughters to stand up in the audience and blew them a kiss, which they returned. I noticed most of the jurors smiled when I did that. When I walked into the party, I pointed at her boyfriend, and he swaggered over, telling me to get lost. He called me Little James and said he was her man now, towering over me with muscles built in the gym and probably on steroids. Then he boasted that my girls weren't going to college. He bragged that Kate had taken all the money from their trust fund and bought him a Ferrari with it. That's when I allegedly beat the living daylights out of him. He claims I broke his nose and knocked out 3 teeth. If that's true, it might be against the law, but you have to ask yourselves if it's against the laws of nature. If a guy like that can go around seducing other men's wives and stealing the money those men worked their whole lives for without any consequence, then no marriage is safe. So if these allegations are true, I not only defended my marriage, but I defended all marriages everywhere, including those of you jurors. One of the jurors, an older guy, pointed to his bare ring finger and winked at me. If just one juror refuses to convict, it's a hung jury and I walk. I felt like I'd just guaranteed myself at least a hung jury. The prosecutor anticipated my strategy and argued that we can't allow vigilante justice in a civilized society. There's never a justification for it. This should be left to divorce courts. I knew better. Divorce court is no place for a husband cheated on by his wife to find justice. My brother's wife cheated on him, and the court awarded her the house and 10 years of alimony. Why do the courts encourage this kind of behavior? My first witness was my daughter, Emily. She testified that she's a senior in high school with a 3.8 GPA. She'd been accepted to Stanford, but because her mother stole her tuition money, she could only afford community college. As she left the stand crying, she hugged me and said loudly for the jury to hear that I was the best dad in the world and that she loved me. One of the women jurors cried. My second witness was my daughter Olivia. She testified that her mother ignored the family, and as the prosecutor suggested, I had planned to divorce Kate months ago, but didn't because she and her sister begged me to wait until after they graduated. That made a solid impression on the jury. She pointed at her mother and shouted that the woman should be the one on trial for stealing their college money. The judge didn't even wait for the DA to object before telling the jury to disregard her outburst. The prosecution called his first witness. My wife testified that I beat the crap out of her boyfriend at the party, but I never touched her. On cross-exam, I asked who paid for her master's degree. She admitted I did. Who paid for her cosmetic surgery last year? She admitted I did and began cheating on me soon after. How long had she been seeing her 12-year younger boy toy? The judge sustained the DA's objection. Then I asked if she withdrew all our money and mortgaged our house so I couldn't afford a divorce lawyer. The DA objected, saying it was 2 questions. She admitted to both separately. When I asked who forged my name on the loan documents, she pleaded the 5th. Then she admitted her boyfriend had laughed in my face about it right before I allegedly beat him up. I asked how she planned to pay for our daughter's college. She didn't answer. I asked if her boyfriend's love of Ferraris was more important than our daughter's future. My daughters, sitting in the audience, stood up and shouted that their mother was a thief who stole their college money, and they never wanted to see her again. The judge had them removed from the courtroom, but the effect on Kate was devastating. The effect on the jury was crucial to my case. The DA objected, but it was sustained, though the jury saw and heard it all. My next witness was Kate's office manager. She was a bitter woman in her 30s who'd been divorced 3 times, each one because of her cheating. She testified that Kate had been bragging about her affair for months to everyone in the office, saying I was just a dumb grease monkey too stupid to figure it out. She said Kate didn't try to hide it and loved treating me like a fool. The office manager admitted she and others in management encouraged the affair because her boy toy looked better to clients than a mechanic with greasy hands. When Kate's lover took the stand, I stood next to him. It was clear he towered over me. I'm 510, and he was at least 63. I wanted the jury to see the size difference. I didn't pick a fight with someone smaller than me, but with someone much bigger. He placed his hand on the Bible. "Raise your right hand," I demanded. He struggled. When he did, I removed the gold Rolex from his wrist. "I'd like to enter this into evidence, Your Honor." "Could you read the inscription on the back?" The judge, a sharp-eyed woman, read it aloud. "To our grandson, James Holt. When did you steal my watch?" "I didn't steal it, little James," he sneered. "Your wife gave it to me." He thought mocking me in front of the jury was a good idea. "So you're saying Kate stole it?" "Well, I didn't take it, so give it back to me, little James." The judge handed it back to me, not him. "Your Honor, I believe the witness just admitted to conspiracy to steal my $50,000 watch and receiving stolen goods. Could you instruct the DA to file charges against him and my wife for this theft and for stealing my daughter's college fund?" Then I asked the guy, "How much money did Kate give you?" He said he didn't know. I said I had the canceled checks. He admitted she gave him over $80,000. "And what services did you provide for that kind of money?" He didn't answer, so I did. "Are you really that good in bed to be worth $80,000? The idiot grinned and said, "Your wife sure thinks so. Unlike you, little James," he sneered at me. I was enjoying his self-destruction. Most husbands can't satisfy their wives, so they come to me. He didn't realize he was losing the jury. By the time he was done testifying, I think most of the men and half the women on the jury wanted to punch him. I never showed any anger when he kept calling me Little James. My dad taught me not to interrupt an opponent when he's making a fool of himself, so I let him go on. "So Kate paid you to be her lover?" The DA's objection was sustained. "Finally, how many other married women have you been with?" "None," he answered before the DA's objection was sustained. "Your Honor, may I briefly leave the courtroom to bring in some witnesses?" The judge agreed. I walked back in with 3 women and 4 kids. I'm asking the question again. "How many married women?" "Objection," the DA shouted. "Your Honor, I'm asking again to prove the witness is a liar who committed perjury." The judge corrected me, saying the proper legal term was to impeach the witness' prior testimony as she overruled the DA. The women and their kids left the courtroom. 5, he admitted. How many families did you break up? He was silent. I know of at least 3 kids who now live in broken homes because of you. Because of your fun with married women, you lost 3 teeth and suffered 2 broken ribs. Do you think you'll seduce any more married women? No way, he quickly answered. So this was a learning experience and prevented more broken homes and kids suffering. I turned to the jury. I'd call that a service to the community. Do you recognize the 4 men in the front row? No, he snapped. One of the men was hitting his palm with his fist while another pretended to slice his throat with his finger. They're the ex-husbands of some of the women you seduced. Want to say something to them, maybe apologize? The DA objected, which was sustained. Remember their faces, you might see them again. The prosecutor called a doctor who testified about the injuries I allegedly inflicted. On cross-examination, I asked if he was married. He was. I asked if now knowing the facts, he had any sympathy for the victim. None at all, he replied. Next, the prosecutor called a therapist who said the guy was too hurt to work, and I was responsible for his lost income. On cross, I asked the therapist what kind of work the guy did. He didn't know. So how can you testify that he can't work if you don't know what he does? The therapist was silent. Can he still be good in bed? I asked. The therapist said yes. Well, since he made $80,000 as a male gigolo, in your opinion, can he keep servicing married women? Of course, the DA objected, and it was sustained, but not before the jury laughed. My strategy was to make the jury laugh so they'd be less likely to convict me. I wanted them to know I wasn't a violent guy, just a wronged husband seeking justice. Then I called my surprise witness. I felt like Matlock from one of my favorite courtroom shows. His name was Robert Hawkins. He contacted me after seeing my story on the news. The DA spit out his water at the prosecution table. He objected, saying the witness's testimony was irrelevant. I asked how he could know that before he testified. The judge temporarily excused the jury while she heard his testimony. Mr. Hawkins, have you and the DA met before today? Yes, he replied. 3 years ago, I had an affair with his wife. He came to my house with 2 cops and they beat the crap out of me. Did he say anything to you while they beat you? Yeah, he said. This is what wife-stealing assholes get. Did you press charges? Hell no. They threatened to lock me up for 10 years on some bogus charge. The DA objected, claiming the testimony was irrelevant. The judge nodded in agreement. Before she could sustain the objection, I said the DA had opened the door to this testimony by arguing in his opening statement that vigilante justice had no place in society. This testimony was relevant because he had personally used it. The judge thought it over, overruled the objection, recalled the jury, and allowed my questioning of Mr. Hawkins into evidence. I was lucky to remember seeing a lawyer on a show use this trick years ago. Who needs law school when you've got reruns? What happened next? I asked. That night, his wife came to my place with a black eye and 2 broken ribs. She said he beat her up. Objection, yelled the DA. Sustained, replied the judge. I was in the zone. Mr. Hawkins, did you see a black eye on the DA's wife when she came to your place? Yes. Did you take her to a hospital? He nodded. Your witness, I said, twirling my pencil. No questions, the DA replied. I tried to call my next witness, the DA's ex-wife, but the DA asked if we could approach the bench. He didn't want her testimony on the record and offered to drop all assault charges if I pled guilty to disturbing the peace and paid a $300 fine. I looked at the jury and refused. No, I think they're on my side, and I want your record of domestic violence on the record. The judge left the bench for a few minutes and went into her chambers. She said we were taking a 30-minute recess. When court resumed, the judge had a huge grin. The DA then told the judge he was dropping all charges. The judge refused. She wanted to hear his ex-wife's testimony. An older man entered the courtroom with a TV crew and 3 sheriffs. The judge smiled at him and the DA nearly choked. His ex-wife testified how he'd beat her that night and others before it. She brought hospital records. The judge listened intently. After the DA's ex-wife testified, the judge dropped all charges against me and asked her if she would testify against her ex-husband. She declined, fearing his power. The older man who entered the court asked to speak. He introduced himself as the district attorney, which I knew from his endless campaign ads. I remembered the news saying he was behind by 2 in the polls and needed a miracle to win re-election. The DA told the DA's ex-wife that her ex would no longer be an assistant DA after today, so she was safe to testify. He faced the TV camera and said, "I will not tolerate wife beaters or allow one to work in my office. I will personally prosecute him." A sheriff handed the DA some papers, cuffed him, and led him away. Then the DA turned to Kate and her boyfriend. "You stole this man's money for your children's college and spent it on a sports car." He turned to the camera, his face a mask of anger. A sheriff handed Kate papers and cuffed her, while another did the same to her boyfriend. "You're both under arrest for theft, forgery, bank fraud, and grand larceny." I realized the DA was smart and used my case to win his re-election. For once in my life, I lucked out. I made a mental note to vote for him. Facing the camera next to me, the DA said his office was all about justice. I knew I'd see that statement and my face in his ads, so I applauded him. The judge looked sternly at me. "Today you got a pass. Next time you won't be so lucky." "Your Honor, there won't be a next time," I said, raising my hand. That week, Kate lost her job. The DA froze all her accounts and assets. She tried to reconcile with me, but I laughed in her face. Our kids refused to speak to her. 2 weeks later, the DA won re-election, and a week after that, I got an invitation to meet him. He said I was the reason he won and was grateful. He said I was a better investigator than most of his staff and offered me a job as an investigator. I would have to take and pass a 6-month criminal law course at the local community college, but I'd be on salary and working with an experienced investigator. Since my arthritis was making it hard to keep being a mechanic, I said yes. He also insisted I take a 3-hour anger management course. "I wish I knew you when my wife divorced me," he said with a grin. He was good to his word and personally prosecuted the former DA for spousal abuse. He got 2 years in prison, alongside many he'd sent there. I heard he won miscongeniality from his fellow inmates. As a bonus, the DA told me he indicted Kate and her boyfriend for a slew of charges based on stealing my watch, the money, and forging my signature. With all her money either frozen or returned to me, she had no means to hire a decent lawyer. After she paid her bail, she was stuck with a new public defender who needed directions to the courthouse. Kate and her lover each got 4 years in prison. My daughters and I never visited her despite her letters. I sued Kate's former employer for intentional infliction of emotional distress because they knew and encouraged her affair. I used her boss's testimony in my trial as evidence. I got $20,000, which I added to my daughter's college fund since tuition keeps going up. The next 2 years brought me joy and sorrow as I drove my daughters to college, with 4 years of tuition safely in the bank beyond Kate's reach. I devoted my life to raising 2 smart, independent girls. I really missed them. Before they left, they made me a color chart so I could match my shirts and pants. Even with their chart, my sense of fashion was hit or miss. They warned me my taste in women was lacking and said they'd pick my next wife. I didn't click with the 3 women they introduced me to. As ordered, I attended the anger management course where I met Selma. A judge ordered her there after she knocked out her ex-husband's girlfriend's teeth. This was a woman after my own heart. Now, for the second story, my name is Gabriel Martinez. After my great-great-great-grandfather who fought for justice, I'm proud of his legacy. You can call me an immigrant or an undocumented worker. I don't care. I obey the laws of God and the laws of the United States. I think I'm a better citizen than many born in the U.S. I was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and with my parents, crossed the border to San Diego when I was 4. Then my uncle drove us to Los Angeles. My mom worked as a maid for the Anderson family, a wealthy family, and my dad started as a gardener. He and my mom saved every penny until my dad could buy his truck, lawnmower, and tools to start his landscaping business. They worked hard and lived frugally. They taught me to delay gratification and plan for the future. When I was 6, I went to an Easter egg hunt at the Andersons with 20 other blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids. My mom spent a week's pay on a new outfit and shoes for me so I wouldn't look like a poor kid. She scrubbed me until I glowed. I was so proud to find 3 eggs. As I ran to show my parents, Alex, the Andersons' 10-year-old son, said a stupid immigrant kid wasn't allowed any eggs and took them, shoving me into the mud, ruining my new suit, while the other kids laughed. I didn't care that he was bigger. I was ready to fight him, but my dad held me back and tried to calm me down. Alex's parents didn't see what happened, and my mom never told them. We left quietly. I never forgot the shame my family and I felt that day and vowed to get revenge. I didn't know when, but my parents taught me patience. We never went back for another Easter egg hunt. I went to school and it was clear I had a gift with numbers. By 10, I did the books for my dad's landscaping business. At 13, I also kept the books for my uncle's bar. At 16, I was the captain of my high school math team and won the citywide math Olympics. We won, and I got a trophy as a mathlete. My proud mom, my stoic dad, and my aunts and uncles all cried as they hugged me and thanked God for everything America had given us. Later, as we ate dinner at my uncle's restaurant, a customer named Juan, with 2 bodyguards, handed me a 100 bill. He said, "They call us ignorant immigrants, but with your brains, you've brought pride to our community." He offered his help if I ever needed it. By 17, while in high school, I was a part-time bookkeeper for the Andersons and their clothing business in LA's Garment District. They treated my mom and me well, but their son Alex was still cruel to us both. He called us names and laughed at us. He was an only child, spoiled by his doting parents. I graduated with honors but could only afford community college. I won the math award for my junior college's math department. Alex dropped out of college, and 6 months later, when his dad died, he took over the business. If you didn't know better, you'd say Alex was good at delegating. If you did, you'd know Alex was lazy and let others do the work. The other employees and I had been well trained by Alex's late father and did our jobs without any supervision from Alex. From a community college business course, I learned that good management wasn't complicated. 10% of management was telling subordinates what to do, the other 90% was making sure they did it right. We all knew our jobs, but Alex was such a jerk that, one by one, his dad's old employees quit. I was one of the last to stay. The business started to decline. It just needed a push off the cliff. I'm not a CPA, just a poor bookkeeper for a millionaire named Alex. I'm 22. I don't make much money. I found out my gorgeous 21-year-old girlfriend now wanted a man who did. I'd been in love with her since high school when Sophia was a sophomore, and I tutored her in math while she taught me to dance. Dancing was her passion. At her Quincy AG+ era, I was her escort. I paid Rita, a talented designer at the Andersons factory, to create a dress just for Sophia. She looked stunning in it. All the other girls wanted one like it. I tried to convince my boss that this was an untapped market, but he said the Latino community couldn't afford expensive dresses, and that was that. Sophia and I danced a waltz, and it was over for me when I caught a whiff of her hair. Sophia, several boys, and I rehearsed the dance scene from the movie Dirty Dancing for over a week. And at the end of our dance, Sophia jumped from the stage into my arms. It brought the house down. Sophia's great-grandfather called us the Latino Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. I didn't know who they were, but it must have been good. Sophia chose me over other guys because she saw me as her ticket out of the East LA ghetto to the wealthy white suburbs. We were both light-skinned enough to pass. She looked like a young Salma Hayek, but without the humor. With my Aunt Carmen's help, who worked at a high-end restaurant, Sophia got a job washing hair and later became a beautician at a top salon in Beverly Hills. She was great at her job and had a lot of wealthy clients. Sophia often came home repeating stories she'd heard from clients about vacations, clothes, and cars. The common factor was these women were pretty with no talent other than marrying wealthy men because of their skills in bed. Sophia spent too much of our money copying their style. This hampered my plan to save for a down payment on a house. Sophia was eaten up with jealousy and envy. I tried to warn her that she was breaking the 10 Commandments with her envy, but she didn't care. I knew she wanted to live their lives, but I didn't know how far she'd go or who she'd hurt to get there. Sophia was more than passionate in bed. She was a tigress. Some weekends we left bed only to eat or use the bathroom. We were so happy. I asked her to marry me several times, but she always said it was too soon or some other excuse. Looking back, I now know she didn't want to be tied down to me. She was looking to trade up, and I was just the first step on her social ladder. I hadn't a clue. I'm not perfect. I don't go to church often, but ever since my parents drilled it into my head as a child, I tried to follow their example and obey the 10 Commandments. I didn't memorize all the prayers, but I figured the commandments were the most important part of the Bible, and the rest wasn't as crucial, except for treating others as you'd like to be treated. Sophia, on the other hand, knew all the hymns and prayers. She thought that made her a better Catholic and earned her a place in heaven, despite any bad things she might do on earth, or that she used birth control. She wasn't too concerned with the commandments or treating others well. Alex admired a photo of Sophia on my desk and made an indecent comment about her. I took the photo home that day and never brought it back. Later that year, Alex invited me and Sophia to his house for a company-wide Christmas party. Remembering the Easter egg hunt years ago, I didn't want to go, but Sophia insisted. She wanted to see the mansion she'd heard about from my mom. I almost never said no to Sophia, so we went. After I warned her that Alex was a pig who'd come on to her, she said she was a big girl and knew how to say no. Blinded by love, I trusted her. Looking back, I was a fool. Every man is a fool for the woman he loves if he truly loves her. When I tried to hug my mom, who was working at Alex's party, she shook her head no with a stern look. She didn't want me acting differently than the other guests. Sophia, however, ignored my mom and pretended not to know a lowly servant. Sophia loved the champagne my mom served and loved the good life, while my boss loved Sophia. Alex took Sophia on a tour of his mansion. They danced exclusively with each other, and with each dance, his hand slid lower down Sophia's back to her rear. She clearly enjoyed it. I tried to cut in, but they refused to let me dance with her. At one point, they went upstairs while everyone smirked at me, and 2 security guards blocked my way. My mom watched my humiliation as she served drinks. I thought of pushing past the guards, punching Alex and breaking some teeth, but my mom held me until I calmed down and changed my mind. She explained I'd get arrested, probably deported, and Alex would just laugh. I'd gain nothing but lose everything. Finally, she made me understand Sophia wasn't worth it. I told her how much I needed revenge on Alex. My mom shook her head no. Take your time, use your brains, not your fists, and don't get even, get ahead. Her last words to me before I left were to move with strategy, not emotion, if I wanted to succeed. My parents may lack formal education, but they're the wisest people I've ever met. I needed a plan that would hurt him much more than a black eye or broken leg. I kissed my mom goodbye, left, and cried all the way home over my broken heart as I plotted Alex's downfall. I know many men would drink themselves into oblivion, but I was raised to be temperate and think clearly. Okay, I had 1 beer. I'm not perfect. In my family, we drown our sorrow with food. I drove to a deli in Beverly Hills where I drowned my sorrow in a large bowl of chicken soup with matzo balls and ate my way to oblivion. One of my aunts worked there as a waitress, and I developed a taste for the Jewish deli food she often brought home. I have another aunt who works at an Italian restaurant nearby and also brought food home. With 5 aunts working as waitresses at various restaurants, I was raised on an eclectic mix of ethnic food. Once, when asked to describe our diet, my dad simply called it American. 2 days later, Sophia returned, and she ignored me when I begged her to stop seeing Alex. I didn't know if it was true, but I said I could forgive her past mistakes, but she laughed in my face. She gave me 2 choices. Door number 1, I could accept that she'd spend a few nights a week with my boss, and in return I'd get a 5 raise. Or door number 2, I could go to hell, lose my job, and be on the street without her. Sophia threatened if I didn't go along, she'd claim I beat her and have me arrested and deported. I hadn't been back to Mexico in 18 years, and I didn't want to return in cuffs. Though I told her I'd accept door number 1, I chose a 3rd option. I'd get my revenge, which meant the total financial destruction of Alex Anderson. I could have left that day, but I'd waited since I was 6 to get even with him. Another 3 months meant nothing. I no longer loved Sophia, but I was sickened by how she debased herself with Alex. I wouldn't take my anger out on Sophia. I understood her fear of poverty and desire for a better life. She couldn't help herself. I doubled my anger on Alex for how he treated her. I knew people who'd rough him up, but bones heal, and I wanted him to suffer where it hurts the most, his wallet. After Christmas break, I went back to work. Though I was choking on my hatred, I didn't show it. I learned from the movie The Godfather to act like a fool, endure ridicule, lull my enemy into a false sense of security, and wait for the right moment to strike. I acted the part of the submissive weakling to make Alex think he was safe from me. I even thanked him for my raise, though the words burned in my mouth. He feared physical violence, which was never part of my plan. My job was to open all the mail, make out checks for the bills, hand them to Alex for his signature, enter the amounts in the ledger, and then mail the checks. I continued my job as usual, except I stopped mailing the checks to the IRS, California Franchise Tax Board, property taxes, car insurance, withholding taxes, and the mortgage on Alex's heavily mortgaged mansion. Those checks went into the shredder. I didn't steal a penny. At worst, I was guilty of negligence, not theft. Every week, I wrote a memo to Alex warning him that he wasn't paying his bills. Of course, I never gave him those memos. I put them in his filing cabinet and computer, neither of which he ever checked. Meanwhile, I stopped paying my rent and all my bills. One advantage of not qualifying for a credit card due to my immigration status was I had no debt. I saved every dollar I could and kept it in cash in an old broken chandelier hanging in the living room. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough since I didn't want a paper trail if I had to disappear. Of course, the creditors sent letters to Alex, but since I opened all the mail, I filed them where they belonged, knowing Alex would never open the cabinet. If I was ever suspected of financial sabotage, those filed letters would clear me of blame. They were my get-out-of-jail-free cards. After 3 months, Alex had over $1 million extra in his accounts and owed his creditors that much plus interest and penalties. The total wouldn't bankrupt him. That's when I began Phase 2, the final part of my plan. I was also the bookkeeper for my uncle's bar in downtown LA. He owned 3 more in Baja, Mexico. The LA bar was in a shady neighborhood with a bunch of immigrants selling stuff on street corners. They worked for a man named Juan, who drove a spotless black Cadillac Escalade. He came from the same village as my family. One of my cousins was married to one of his. He was the man who gave me the 100 when I won the math contest and said he'd help me if I needed it. I now knew what Juan did for a living and tried to stay clear of him. He was often in a booth in the back of the bar. I slowly walked over to him with my hands visible. He was cautious and carried a .45 caliber pistol with enough spare magazines to hold off a small army. I asked if he'd like $1 million. He quickly agreed. After I explained the plan to him, he was impressed and once again offered me a job. I said if my plan worked, I'd be happy to work for one of his many legitimate businesses. Sophia hardly came back to our apartment at all. I pretended I still wanted to be intimate with her to keep up the act. Of course, she refused, which suited me. Alex was a pig who probably gave her all sorts of diseases. Alex would drive her to our apartment in his Ferrari much too fast every Friday at 5:00 p.m. like clockwork so she could drop off her dirty laundry and pick up clean clothes for a weekend of clubbing, which I had washed like the good little submissive they thought I was. Alex loved taunting me about this at work. It was disgusting, but I had to do it for my plan to work. Revenge is a dish best served cold. One Friday after work, I threw away all of Sophia's clothes and belongings, handed the apartment keys to the landlord, and left for Mexico. I didn't give notice to Alex. On Monday, I started work for my uncle's bars in Baja. That last Friday, Alex, as usual, sped toward my apartment when he rear-ended Juan's black Escalade. He didn't know the car suddenly stopped because the brake lights were disconnected. Alex couldn't swerve left because a truck was beside him, and another truck blocked him on the right. Those trucks were part of the plan. The SUV had 6 passengers, all of whom needed an ambulance. Alex and Sophia were hurt, but not seriously. Sophia never wore a seatbelt, no matter how much I begged her. She went face first through the windshield, scarring her once beautiful face. Though I hadn't sought revenge on Sophia, karma caught up with her. I suppose I should have gloated, but it broke my heart to hear what happened. When Alex gave the cops his insurance, he learned he had none. The policy had been canceled for non-payment. The ticket he got for that was the least of his problems. Sophia, plus the 6 passengers, all sued him for $750,000 each, a total of $5.25 million. Their lawyer froze Alex's bank account so he couldn't hide his money. Then the tax bills and mortgages came due. Alex went from being up $1 million to owing over $5 million. He filed for bankruptcy, lost his house and business. Now that my mom was out of a job, she and my dad moved with me to Tijuana. With all they'd saved over the years, they had enough, and with U.S. Social Security, to retire comfortably. Alex had been such a jerk that he had no friends to help him now that he was poor. He dumped Sophia, whose disfigured face no longer interested him. Juan and his men received over $80,000 from the bankruptcy court. They were happy. Sophia also got $80,000, which paid for surgery on her face, leaving just a few scars. Even though she broke my heart, I was glad she got the money and the surgery. I hadn't meant to hurt her. She was a victim of her greed and Alex's cruelty. In case Alex couldn't figure out what happened, I called him on his last day at work and explained that pushing me into the mud as a kid and stealing my girlfriend had consequences. Thanks to me, he was broke. Do you still think I'm just a stupid immigrant?" He was speechless, and I felt relieved that 20 years of humiliation were avenged, and I no longer needed to carry that burden. I stayed in Mexico for a few months to let things cool down. Then I returned to LA. I contacted Juan and suggested he use the clean money from the accident to buy the Andersons' bankrupt business and hire me to run it. I explained my plan to Juan. Juan had faith in me, so he did it. I renamed the company La Bella Moda. I hired young Latina women as dress designers. Some of these girls were incredibly talented. The business focused on the Latino community and flourished. I offered girls a 75% discount if they handed out our brochures at their schools and brought in 5 other girls who bought our dresses. I think we dressed at least half the Latina girls in California, celebrating their Quincy AG+ era, and we had about the same market share for prom. It was a market that was not only growing in size but in wealth. Rita, who designed Sophia's dress years ago, was the most talented and market-savvy designer it ever met. She was also smart and beautiful. I paid her tuition to attend the Fashion Institute. In return, her designs became our best sellers. She came from a traditional family. She invited me to Sunday dinner, which, even though we hadn't yet dated, meant we were almost engaged. Her dad taught high school math, and we bonded over trigonometric functions and his daughter's future. Since we weren't married, she couldn't live with me, and soon I couldn't live without her, so we married a month later. She was pregnant and designed a new line of clothing for the factory maternity clothes. Sales went through the roof. With each maternity dress, at Rita's insistence, we include a booklet on prenatal care. At the insistence of many customers, we also sell a line of maternity prom dresses. It saddens me that we sell so many. Business is very good because of the hard work my talented employees do, and I share the wealth with them. At our Christmas party this year, as I handed out bonuses, a group of my employees lifted me on their shoulders, shouting "Viva Martinez" as my wife, in-laws, parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins watched with pride. Now it was my turn to cry. Thanks for tuning in to this wild tale of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice. If you were in James or Gabriel's shoes, how would you have handled it? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Until next time.